Let me tell you something strange about people who avoid social events. We live in a world where connection is currency, where calendars fill up weeks in advance, where being invited feels like validation. Yet some people decline, again and again. And here is the question that always lingers beneath the polite excuses. Why would someone choose absence in a world obsessed with presence? It's easy to assume they're antisocial, awkward, arrogant even. It's easy to label their silence as insecurity. But that's not the full picture. Beneath the surface, there's an entire psychology at play. A quiet architecture of experience that most people never see. For some people, avoiding social events isn't about disliking people. It's about protecting something fragile inside themselves. And maybe that fragility isn't weakness. Maybe it's awareness. You notice it in small ways. They hesitate before saying yes. They ask who will be there. They scan the room when they arrive, calculating where to stand, how to enter conversations already in motion. You see them leave early or cancel last minute. You see them smiling but slightly guarded, engaged but slightly elsewhere. From the outside, it looks like disinterest. From the inside, it can feel like survival. Psychologists have found something fascinating about social energy. Not everyone's nervous system experiences stimulation the same way. For some, crowds amplify possibility. For others, crowds amplify threat detection. It's not dramatic. It's biological. Some nervous systems are tuned finely like instruments that pick up every shift in tone, every micro-expression, every unspoken tension. And when you're built that way, a room full of people isn't just noise. It's data, constant, unfiltered, overwhelming data. But here's what's often misunderstood. It's not about being shy. It's not about lacking charisma. Sometimes, it's about depth, because when you experience conversations intensely, when you feel the undercurrents beneath small talk, surface-level interaction can feel exhausting. Not because you're superior, not because you're detached, but because you crave something slower, something real. It's not that you hate parties. You just can't find yourself in them. And in a world that celebrates visibility, choosing invisibility can look like rebellion. For some, the decision to avoid social events comes after a kind of emotional burnout. There was a time when they tried harder, when they showed up to everything, when they performed versions of themselves that were easier to digest. They laughed louder than they felt. They agreed more than they believed. They stayed longer than they wanted, and slowly, something inside them grew tired, because self-presentational pressure, the psychological strain of managing how you're perceived, can become heavy over time. You begin to notice how much of your energy goes into curating reactions, monitoring your tone, editing your opinions. And one day, quietly, you ask yourself, who am I when I'm not performing? Here's what's often misunderstood about people who withdraw. It's assumed they lack confidence, but sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes they step back because they've become aware of how easily they disappear in groups, how quickly they adapt, how effortlessly they shapeshift to keep harmony. Avoiding certain social spaces can become an act of psychological ownership, the power to choose what parts of yourself the world gets access to. Because let's be honest, most of what we call socializing isn't just connection. It's subtle competition, status calibration, impression management. We scroll before we attend. We compare before we speak. And in a culture that rewards extroversion, constant availability, and social proof, saying no becomes countercultural. Not because you hate people, but because you're learning to protect your internal landscape. And maybe that's not antisocial. Maybe it's self-preservation, because think about it. When was the last time you left a social event feeling deeply nourished instead of subtly drained? When was the last time you felt fully yourself in a crowded room? And if the answer takes a moment to find, what does that tell you? But not everyone who avoids social events is doing it from a place of peace. Some are driven by fear. For some, avoidance is shaped by social anxiety and anticipatory fear of judgment, a mind that replays conversations before they happen, a body that prepares for a humiliation even in safe rooms. The same silence can hold two different stories, one rooted in discernment, another rooted in dread. And here's the paradox. In a world that constantly says, put yourself out there, choosing not to becomes an act of self-definition. But it can also become isolation. There's a deep philosophical undertone to that absence. Visibility has become synonymous with existence. If you're not seen, not photographed, not tagged, did you even participate? Yet maybe the most profound moments in life happen quietly, unposted, unannounced. This is where the paradox lies. Our culture was designed to connect us more than ever before, yet many people feel more fragmented than ever. So some step away, not because they don't long for connection, but because they long for a connection that feels real. The longer someone avoids performative spaces, the more their perception shifts. Conversations become intentional, friendships become fewer but deeper. Time alone becomes restorative instead of lonely. Colors look richer in solitude, thoughts become clearer, identity feels less diluted, and yet the ache for belonging never fully disappears. Because humans are wired for connection, even the quiet ones. Studies on introversion and overstimulation show that some brains process dopamine differently. High stimulation environments can feel less rewarding and more taxing. Research on social anxiety reveals heightened threat detection when anticipating social evaluation. In simple terms, for some people, a party isn't neutral, it's neurologically intense. And protecting your energy isn't pathology, it's regulation. Sometimes the very presence of someone who avoids the spotlight makes them misunderstood. They're labeled distant, cold, disengaged, but their silence isn't emptiness. It's depth. They don't need every room to know them. They need a few people to understand them. Maybe that's what real confidence looks like. Not dominance, not constant participation, but the quiet certainty that you don't have to attend everything to belong somewhere. There's something sacred about choosing where your energy goes, about keeping parts of your life unperformed. In a world that constantly says, be everywhere, choosing to be selective becomes a form of integrity. Maybe some moments are too intimate for crowds. Maybe some parts of you unfold only in smaller rooms. And maybe that's not avoidance, maybe that's wisdom. So the next time you notice someone declining an invitation, maybe pause before assuming. Or if this feels uncomfortably familiar, maybe you don't need to justify it tonight. So let's return to the question. Why would someone choose absence in a world obsessed with presence? Maybe because presence, for them, requires authenticity. And authenticity cannot survive constant performance. Avoiding social events doesn't always mean avoiding people. Sometimes it means avoiding noise. Sometimes it means protecting a nervous system that feels deeply. Sometimes it means choosing quality over quantity. And sometimes it means you're learning who you are when no one is watching. Because being unseen doesn't mean being alone. And being quiet doesn't mean being empty. In the end, avoiding the crowd might not be withdrawal. It might simply be the quiet art of staying whole.